Good evening, and welcome to This Week in Football, where we analyze the latest and greatest in all things football. I'm your host, Ryan Pavlicek. To my left is Casey Bryant. To my right is Matt McNamara. Tonight, the Dallas Cowboys will travel to Chicago to take on the Bears in Week 14 on Thursday Night Football. This game will feature two of the most polarizing quarterbacks in the league, Tony Romo versus Jay Cutler. How do you guys see that matchup playing out, considering that Tony Romo is having a stellar season, but Jay Cutler is clearly not?
Well, I think that as far as, especially with last week, Romo did struggle against a really good Eagles team, but now he's going up against a really, not the best Bears team, especially on the pass defense. And so I feel like he's going to really try and redeem himself from the embarrassment, especially because of the fact that the Cowboys are still in the playoff hunt and they still need a ways to go. So I feel like he's really going to be looking towards redemption. He's 6-0 on the road of the season, which will be huge against going into Chicago and Soldier Field. So I don't think that will affect him too much. Plus, the Bears' pass defense is 30th in the league, so that's really a troublesome stat. And plus, they've already been torched by big-name quarterbacks like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Matt Stafford. So I think Romo will really come through. He'll really rely on guys like DeMarco Murray and obviously Dez Bryant and Jason Witten to help him out the entire game. I think he'll have a stellar game overall. As far as Jay Cutler goes, I think he'll have a good game, but not a great one. It helps to have guys like Alshon Jeffrey and Martellus Bennett. But then again, his last 5 games, he's had 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 250 yards total. Those are not good stats going into this, especially when he struggled against bad teams defensively like Tampa and Minnesota. And Dallas, they might not have the best pass defense, but I still think that Cutler will have his moments of struggle. It's been a rough season for him, and it's been a rough season for the whole team. So I think Romo will win the quarterback matchup between the two of them, definitely.
When you think about Jay Cutler's career, the Bears have always really kind of depended on him in a bizarre way. Because if you look at over the last few years of his injury concerns, usually pretty good records. They kind of look like an NFC favorite. Cutler would get hurt. The season would just go down the tube. But now this year, when you think about the weapons he has, you said Alshon, you said Brandon Marshall, Matt Forte. They have a pretty good team. And this year, he's just been completely off.
You're absolutely right. Jay Cutler has been relied on far too heavily this year, especially with a lot of his injury concerns. And his game on Thanksgiving Day against the Detroit Lions, he brought back about 51 as opposed to 7 rushing plays. And 5 of them are Matt Forte. I mean, you can't win a football game when your offense is that imbalanced. You have to have some semblance of both a rushing game and an air attack. That's on the coaching staff, and that's quite frankly on Jay Cutler for his inability to beat the Detroit defense, saying, we're not going to be able to get through the air very much. Why not try to at least attempt to penetrate through the Detroit Lions defensive line? There's got to be some way that you find a happy medium between 251 passes to 7 rushes. It's just not good.
I mean, I think for the Bears team, it was going into that game specifically. The Lions have one of the best rush defenses in the league, but you still have Matt Forte, and he's still going to really tear up the ground. Even if the rushes he had were bad, eventually he's going to break through for some big rushes, and that's what they really needed because Cutler was being very ineffective for them against a really good Lions team.
When Forte is on, and you can't really judge whether or not he's going to have a good game out of that. For 5 rushing attempts. Matt Forte said in a press conference after the game that you can't win the game with the rush that it takes. It's not so much bringing the ball forward. It's more we have to find some sort of balance because you're looking at balance for your offensive play on the
And the Bears, they love to get Forte involved in the passing game. They love to get him out of the backfield, maybe put him out around 5-6 yards, curl route, anything. Forte's very elusive like that. And that was definitely their game plan against Detroit. They didn't want to run against him like this. But when you only rush it 5 times, they know what's coming. They know your running plays are going to be when you kind of toss it out to the side. And although Forte racked up almost 70 receiving yards, it wasn't enough to do anything. But anyway, if you look at Forte's season, he had a hot start, and now he's slowed down. Possibly because they're not giving him the ball as much, and also because they're becoming more one-dimensional. I mean, defenses aren't keeping Jay Cutler seriously anymore. On the other side of the ball, Dez Bryant was kind of in the same situation, started off hot, but now he's gone a couple games without a touchdown. So what does Tony Romo need to do to get him the ball in this game? And does it help that the Bears secondary has not been good this season?
Well, yeah, that obviously helps for him, but I think that he needs to look for him in the right situations. Dez Bryant is definitely one of the best receivers when it comes to red zone opportunities. So if they can utilize him, especially in the red zone, I think they'll be good. And make sure they put plays which will fit Dez Bryant's strengths, which is, pushing off defenders and sort of being that great one-on-one matchup. He's not always the guy who's going to speed by you, but he's always going to be that guy who's always going to jump up for that catch and make it. And so if they can find the right plays for Dez Bryant, I think they could really tear through this horrible Bears pass defense. And so utilizing him in the correct situations, I think Dez Bryant will have a monster game.
you know what, Des Bryant, you were saying kind of the best place, and I feel like the best place for him where you just throw it up and he's forced to go up and make spectacular catches. When you watch him play, when he makes those catches to cross the maker, when he gives that stiff arm, he gets so pumped up and it just turns into like a monster right there. And then Romo can kind of throw anything to him when he catches it. So hopefully he get angry tonight, but obviously Des does need to do more. And how about, I think another reason for Tony Romo and the Cowboys' offense success is the emergence of DeMarco Murray. He's the NFL's leading rusher right now. We talk about Matt Forte, but DeMarco Murray, he's kind of slowed down over the last 5 games. I feel like first half of this season, he had 100 yards every game for the first 8. And obviously he's not going to keep that up all year, but he hasn't scored many touchdowns over the last month and a half. Do you see them trying to get him more involved, or do they try and just use the passing game against, again, a rough Bears secondary?
I mean, it's interesting of a question because the Bears' rush defense is much better than their pass defense. And so maybe early on they might give Murray a few rushes here and there, but if they can break the game open early and really get through that defense, I think they'll utilize him a lot more from some big outside rushes because that's what he does the best with. And if he can break through at least a couple of the Bears' defenders, I feel like he'll have a very solid game. He did struggle against Philadelphia, but Philadelphia does have a good rush defense. And so Murray, I think, will have that pressure added onto him where he needs to perform not only to be the best rusher in the league, but to really help his team win. And I feel like they'll definitely utilize him more, both in the rushing and in the passing, because he's such a great threat in both of those areas.
I think it's just because he hasn't found the end zone as much, which is where all kind of the talk is coming from.
Doesn't make much of a difference.
And keep in mind, Tony Romo for the season, he's coming off another back surgery. As we get more into the season, now we know going to the game in London against Jacksonville, many thought he shouldn't have played really well. Connected with Des Bryant with 2 long touchdowns. His back might be getting healthier, which is why he's trying to go more of the pass. But they do need to be careful because I think they need to utilize who's right now probably the best running back in the league. But we're talking about the Bears' defense. Let's look at the other side of the ball for the Cowboys. Their defense this season. They lost Sully before the season, and everyone thought they might have the worst defense ever, honestly. And they played a lot better as of late. Do you think that's going to hold up against the Bears' offense that is probably ripe for the kill?
Well, I mean, definitely, as you said before, their defense has been much better than expected. And in some of the big games they've played, their defense has stepped up. And so overall for the game, I don't think their defense is going to make that huge of an impact unless it's late in the game. But I think they'll be good enough to hold Chicago back enough so that the Cowboys have a great time for possession and then be able to drive down the field. So I feel like their defense makes some sort of impact. If they need to make an impact, the obvious choice is to get to Cutler early. Because as we've seen in the playoffs and everything else, if you pressure Cutler, if you hit Cutler, he will get injured, he will make mistakes, he will get flustered, and that takes the whole team down. And so the Cowboys, their front line needs to get to Cutler early and make sure he makes some mistakes and really take Forte out of the game. If they do that, they'll make a big impact and really get to a Cutler and the rest of the Bears team and really throw them off.
most part of this offense. I like our guys receiving whether it's 14,
Yeah. And Devin Color has 20 turnovers. He leads the league. You're not going to win games like that, and that's why they're 5-7. So anyway, what's your prediction for tonight?
All right. I'm predicting that the Dallas Cowboys win 31-21. I think it will be a very good offensive game between the two of them, but I think the Cowboys will be good enough to get past this Bears defense has been struggling. As I said before, the Bears defense cannot stop big pass offense. You've seen with Tom Brady destroying them. You've seen with Aaron Rodgers destroying them. Matt Stafford, they all destroyed them. And it wasn't even close. These were blowouts. But I think that Chicago as a team, they're 5-7. There's no ton of motivation on the team, and I think that will really lead to their struggles. And that's what led to their struggles. And so I feel like it's going to continue already because Tony Romo is going to plow through them along with DeMarco Murray.
I've been saying before, honestly, I have 20-20. I think the Cowboys are going to come out on top of them. The Cowboys are going to be they're going to be a bad really because that's what's really focused for us. That's really what's all about. It's similar to what the Packers do.
The Chicago Bears.
Well, we will see how those predictions hold up. Like them, I'm going to take the Cowboys, but I think it's going to be a little closer than some others might think. When we come back, we're going to talk about who's in and who's out of the college football playoffs and some notable news for the rest of Week 14 in the NFL. Welcome back. We're here in the studio and going to talk about the highly disputed rankings that came out on Tuesday for the college football playoffs. In case you forgot, here's the rankings from 6 to 1. So 6 we had Baylor, at 5 we had Ohio State, 4 we had Florida State, 3 we had TCU, and 2 was again Oregon, and Alabama stayed in the top spot. Now I think the biggest debate is really who deserves more between TCU and Baylor, but that debate may have already been set because they put them above Florida State, who was undefeated last season, won the national championship, and are still undefeated. So does this mean TCU is set at number 3?
It's absolutely
TCU had a 3% lead in the fourth quarter. So by all means, they were the better team the whole game. They just kind of collapsed.
Yeah.
What I think is the issue, though, is that they're both playing the same conference. So when you look at it, you think about this playoff with all the variables and how complicated it can get, and we understand it can get complicated, but we're just in the same conference, same record. Head-to-head must be the logical thing to do, but with TCU at 3 and Baylor at 6, that's a huge gap.
That's true. But at the same time, we have to think with Baylor, their loss was a double-digit loss to now unranked West Virginia. And so you think about that loss, that factors huge into their system. Plus TCU in all of their games, besides that one, even in that one, they've been dominant on the offense and really shown everybody what team they can do. Baylor's been great, no doubt about it, but I feel like TCU, as of now, is the better team. And I think it does make more sense. You would want more like of a variation of conferences in this playoff, but I don't think it's just based off that. I think it's based off a multitude of factors. And as far as them being above Florida State as number 3, I don't think it necessarily locks them, but it does show that this new system is paying more attention to performance and not who can win on very close comeback situations, which Florida State obviously does, but they should be able to win more convincingly in some of those games. So I feel like TCU has been performing well, and I feel like the rankings so far have been pretty good for them. And unless Florida State blows out Georgia Tech in the finals and TCU barely beats Iowa State, I feel like the rankings will probably stay the same way between the two of them.
I just think that, with TCU and how well they played, they did lose to Baylor. And just the problem is that spacing. You have a 16 and a 3 seed, and you just put TCU above Florida State. I guess the issue with that is if you kept them at 4 and say TCU won this week and so did Baylor, you could have that head-to-head be the tiebreaker. You could put Baylor into 4, let's say. But by putting them up against 3, now it's kind of saying, oh, well, now Florida State would be the next team to fight. But they're undefeated, and they're probably going to win again. So I think that's where kind of the concern comes. And obviously, we're forgetting about Ohio State. I mean, what about their odds making it into the top 4? I mean, how will they fare against Wisconsin? They have their third-string quarterback, Cardell Jones, and they were playing with their second-string quarterback. It was J.C. Barrett after he replaced Brax Miller. They've won every game since then, since losing their Heisman Trophy candidate. So where do they factor into all this?
That's really
So if Ohio State wins, and they can say they've won games with their first, second, and third-string quarterbacks, and they don't make it in, then who's going to fall out? Would Florida State be the next to fall out, or do you think they could pull out the number 3 seed TCU?
I think it's possible either way. I think it all depends on their performances in their, well, at least for Florida State against Georgia Tech, as I said before, and TCU with Iowa State. And if it really makes a convincing argument, then maybe. But if Ohio State, if they want to, then first of all, they have to win, and then they have to win convincingly. They can't just win by a couple points. They really have to show that they were able to defeat a really good Wisconsin team with, the situation. And I understand the situation might not actually play in to the system rankings itself, but it's still very impressive. So I think Ohio State is a very small chance, but they still have a very small semblance of a chance. They just have to win against Wisconsin and really win big.
I agree with that. So I think that goes on to the next point with the playoff standings as a whole. Is this showing that the system might be failing in its first year? Because, if all these teams win, which they probably will, you're going to look at 2 teams that aren't in the playoff that could easily go on a run and win the national championship if they were. So do you think they need to think about expanding it to 8 teams right away? Maybe more teams, maybe have a computer do the top 4, and maybe they put in their own criteria different than what they were using last year? I mean, what's the change that might need to be made?
Well, I think I don't really think there should be much of a change because I feel like the system they're using right now is very good. It's unbiased. It really focuses on performance. And I think 4 teams is important because the debate we've had in the past 5 to 10 years, it's always been about, like, when the BCS playoff rankings, it's always the 3 seed or the 4 seed that really, gets snubbed, like Oklahoma and Texas a few years ago. They're always saying, oh, they should be in it. You never really have that debate of, oh, the number 7 seed should be in the championship because they're better than the 1 seed. That's usually not the debate. So I feel like 4 teams for now is very good because you're the top 4 teams, and these are all teams that have proved in some way that they deserve to be here, as opposed to 5 through 8, which you might not necessarily have the same agreement for. So I feel like the 4 playoff rankings is good. It's shorter. It really shows which teams are going to be the best. And even so, 1 through 4, those could all be like 1 seeds if you put them in like an NCAA tournament like basketball. But I feel like the system they have right now is good. If it doesn't work out, then maybe think about 8. But for now, I feel like 4 and the computer system they have right now is perfect for college football.
That's the beauty of college football is that every game in the regular season people want to watch because if a team loses, their season could be over. Like you were saying with the NCAA basketball tournament, it all comes down to March Madness. You could see good teams lose 4 or 5 games, but they're going to be there in the end, and that's a tournament to watch. It's a month long. So I think that's what college football doesn't want. They don't want it to go out that much. But I disagree with you to a point because you enhance it to 8 teams. you can still have that situation where the team loses 1 or 2 games, they still might not make it into the top 8 considering how competitive it's been. And I think that's where the debate will come. I think every more than 8 teams, then you're going to get more into kind of college basketball.
But you're right, yes, because in the first season, every game is going to be like this. I think the one thing about the college football is that that's really important. This was the big ask is three teams to win the game. This is really well. So now that I have this so now you're going to be looking at okay, for Georgia Tech, you have the coach for the medical making the playoffs. These are the things you want to say no matter what record. What's the one you're going to look at? You have to think about people what is a real league. You know the very best of that thing. What's the last money that you from the European points that not
And you're going to see it now because we put it at 4 teams. And if you put it at 8, it's going to be the highest of 7.
It also takes away the stakes of the regular season, where every game matters. As far as like winning, not only winning but winning big. With basketball, you can lose a couple games and still be number 1 seed and still make it into the playoffs, as Casey said. But with football, there is that sort of high stakes that are raised for it. So I feel like adding teams to it would just sort of take away from the regular season in general.
And hey, we think all these teams might win, but then again, Oregon, they got to play Arizona again. Arizona's the one loss, and you never know. Arizona could win that game. They've been hot as late. That loss doesn't look so bad anymore. So obviously, these rankings aren't set in stone, but if everything stays the same, they may be. And I guess in the end, that's kind of our spirited debate about the college football rankings right now and how some teams will fare as they move forward. When we come back, we're going to talk about the headlines from Week 14 and take a look at some of the major games. Welcome back. Let's head back into the NFL. So specifically, there's some individual highlights and some big games to look forward to. But first, let's start with, what's coming out of Cleveland. Brian Hoyer, another week, they lost. He got benched, and people wanted him out. They wanted Johnny Football to come in, bring him to the playoffs, take that 7-5 record to the next step. But, Hoyer's been the guy all along. Where do you think the decision, how do you think the decision played out?
I think it's the right decision. Brian Hoyer third quarterback for the team. He's also like kind of a quick look for Brian. It's not looking for time. You know, we have some sense of appearance. And it's what's going on with the market. That's not just a person. It's more of a group. It's not everything from the basketball. It's not even the good part of the set as well. It's just Brian Hoyer had a work back. It's more of a catch back.
I'm glad you touched on Josh Gordon because ironically, ever since Gordon came back in the lineup, it's been 2 games where these have been arguably his worst games, and that's kind of built off, a little bit of a rough stretch they had before that. And, they didn't blame Hoyer. I remember the reports were saying a lot of the reason that they stuck with him was because on one of the interceptions, the film said Josh Gordon didn't adjust to the ball the right way. Obviously Gordon, he had a 10-game suspension. He's not in football shape yet. He's getting better. He's putting up yards, but he's missed a lot of balls. He's been targeted so many times more than receptions he's made. And I think Hoyer, like you said, needs to get that help from the supporting cast. And if you just throw a rookie in there right now, it doesn't make sense to me.
Definitely. Despite his struggles, he is still one of the most consistent parts of this team. And to throw someone in like Manziel, I know a lot of the fans would like for him to lead them to the promised land, but it's most likely not going to happen. If you keep Hoyer in with his experience and with his leadership overall, I think he's really what they need to help make the playoffs. He's been a very good quarterback so far, and I think he will continue to be against teams like the Colts and like Carolina and their upcoming schedule. So I feel like, keeping him in will help the team chemistry. It'll make sure that they stay consistent, and I think he'll really understand that, okay, I got benched for a little bit, but now I'm going to come back, and I'm really going to focus on making sure that we win these games. And if that does include, targeting Josh Gordon less, I think for the better, because he does have other receivers that he did rely on before and that he can rely on now. I feel like Hoyer is definitely the best decision for them. Yeah, definitely.
And you mentioned Tebow. Could you imagine if Johnny Manziel came in, led the Browns to the playoffs, and in that playoff, and in a playoff game through a 10-yard slant in overtime, that whichever receiver, let's say Josh Gordon had a crazy stiff arm, ran 80 yards for one touchdown. I don't think
I'm pretty sure ESPN will lose like 80% of its viewership. It's literally 24 hours of Johnny Manziel, Johnny Manziel, Johnny Manziel. It would be one of the biggest media hype stories of all time, to be honest. Yeah, exactly.
Mansell could be great, but Hoyer has not lost the job. I don't think he's clearly lost the job, and that's the decision. Now, anyway, let's go to the NFC. How about the situation with Jim Harbaugh? I mean, what do you think plays out? I mean, it's pretty clear that he's going to leave San Francisco. I mean, although they're still in the playoff race, I think if he makes the playoffs, I think they want to keep him. But honestly, it looks like he's just not going to want to run off it. So as we look ahead, Michigan wants him. The Jets probably want him. Oakland clearly wants him. How does this play out for the 49ers this season? I hope all the all Harbaugh has done in San Francisco since getting there 4 seasons ago is they've won games. They've won a lot of games, and they hear that maybe that, barking coach mentality just isn't getting through those players. I think it's more safe on the players in the locker room than anything. Because, you look at Rex Ryan with the Jets. He won early. The 49ers haven't won. And now you can see that his ass is getting thin because they're not winning. But the 49ers are still winning. They're in a playoff race. And it's a very interesting situation.
It definitely is. I mean, it is certainly a distraction for the team. And I'm not completely sure with the 49ers team of this year if they're going to make the playoffs. And if they don't, then you really have to consider whether or not Harbaugh's going to weigh his options. And like Casey said, I don't think Harbaugh's really ready to go back to college, especially because of the fact that they're going to expect him to be long-term. And he really hasn't been a long-term coach, even when he was with Stanford and now San Francisco. He's obviously been a great coach. And I think that as far as between the Jets and the Raiders, I think Oakland would be a much better pick. Because for the Jets, for a coach, that's where coaches go to die. Good coaches, at least. Because Jim Harbaugh is a great coach, and I feel like the pressure in New York would be a little different for him, especially because he's been a West Coast coach his entire time. His toughness is what the Raiders have always, emulated and always really sort of promoted. And so if he comes to that team eventually, like he did with the 49ers, I feel like after a few years, he'll really improve their defense. He'll make them a much tougher, much more gritty team. They might need to change a few things in offense. I mean, with Carr, he is a very good quarterback, but they have to finish the running situation, especially with Jim Harbaugh. But I feel like they would be able to do that. So I think Harbaugh, the best pick would definitely be at the Raiders. I feel like he could really improve that team. Not so much with the Jets and not so much with Michigan either. So I feel like Harbaugh, if he does decide to leave, go to the Raiders. If not, then stay with the 49ers a few years and see what happens.
If you see how he's been as a coach, I think he is the type of coach that could win a Super Bowl. And I think that's what he wants to do. And although his alma mater is calling, that's just, that's a step back, I feel like, for a guy like Harbaugh, who's been to the Super Bowl before. He's been close to the NFC Championship game. But anyway, now let's go into the matchups for this week, because, that's what everyone cares about the most, specifically over in the AFC North. Pittsburgh plays Cincinnati in a huge game that could definitely just make the AFC North even more interesting. Considering Cincinnati has about a 1.5 game lead with that tie. Absolutely. Started off hot, slowed down, kind of getting hot. You can't really get a feel for this. So for you, Cincinnati's not running away from Pittsburgh in the AFC North.
No, I definitely agree with Casey. I feel like the Steelers the past couple of weeks have been very dormant, and right now they need to get back to that form they were a few weeks ago where Roethlisberger was completely dominating. So that means relying on him for more passing, making sure Le'Veon Bell is the right place because he's a great running back, but only in those certain plays where he can really run up the middle and get past those defenders. And then obviously their defense has to step up because, I mean, they've been really struggling these past couple of games, and they need to step up, really make sure to stop Andy Dalton, of course, make sure Giovanni Bernard doesn't get anything on the ground, really hold back A.J. Green. Their whole team really just needs to, step up to the plate. And, I mean, the Bengals aren't the best team. They almost just lost to the Buccaneers in a very close game. So, I mean,
Controversial ending.
controversial ending, exactly. So does that really, show like a really dominant team? I don't think so. I feel like if they do win, which I think the Steelers will, it will really shake up the AFC North race. And there are a lot of different teams to go for as far as the AFC North right now. Still,
And that game's obviously going to headline the early games. But now, how about Sunday Night Football? We have the Patriots home to San Diego, who, San Diego's a threat. They're only one game behind the Patriots, technically, and they're still in that race with the Chiefs/Broncos for the AFC West. And I feel like Philip Rivers, he loves these games against Tom Brady and the Patriots. What do you see happening in that one? Rivers has developed a hot hand since that shutout loss in Miami, but I guess Brady's hand is a bit hotter, and we're going to go with that. Hard to argue with that.
yeah, I definitely think, as Casey said, the Patriots have a much bigger advantage in this game. Only real advantage San Diego has is the fact that they're at home, and they do have a good pass defense, but I mean, Tom Brady is still Tom Brady. He's going to want to bounce back. And with the problem with the Chargers is that they have no run game whatsoever. And so they're really going to rely on Philip Rivers. And although the Patriots' pass defense has struggled, they have struggled, but that's because they've played recently guys like Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Matthew Stafford back to back to back.
A lot of
Aaron
yards.
Rodgers. And you remember earlier in the year, they were dominant on pass defense. And I feel like if the Chargers are only relying on Philip Rivers, I feel like if the Patriots can stop them, which I think they will, then the Patriots will run away with this game, and it will really slow down the Chargers' momentum. I know that Philip Rivers is very good in December, but I don't think the December Magic's going to work against a Patriots team like this year. So the Patriots really have the advantage.
Let's go look at a quarterback with maybe even a hotter hand over in Green Bay, specifically because Monday Night Football is going to be in Lambeau, a place that the Packers and Aaron Rodgers really love to play. But what makes this game interesting is Patriots the Falcons. We're coming off a big win. Say what you will about the Cardinals and they're playing Drew Stanton and they lost Andre Ellington in the game. They're 5-7, technically above the Saints, who are also 5-7 in the NFC South. Falcons, they have talent. They can go into Green Bay and get a few bounces here and there and maybe win that game. Who knows? you don't see Matt Ryan being Matty Ice in this one.
Yeah. Honestly, this game is going to be a complete blowout, and I can already see it now. Because of the fact that the Falcons are literally last in pass defense against Aaron Rodgers. The rush defense isn't doing too well either, and now you have Eddie Lacy coming up against them. I understand the Falcons have a little momentum, but they weren't big games. I mean, obviously the Cardinals was a big win, but the Cardinals have been struggling as of late. And so the problem with the Falcons is they're going to rely on Matt Ryan way too much. And he's going to make some mistakes because the Packers' pass defense has been pretty good so far. And Aaron Rodgers, as I said before, he's just going to plow right through them, especially because of the home field advantage. Falcons are used to playing in a dome. They're used to playing a lot of their games in the South. So going up to Lambeau, adjusting to the temperature is one of the bigger challenges for itself. I really don't see Atlanta having any chance of beating the Packers or even beating them with a close margin. I feel like the Packers are going to once again show how dominant they are because they have been that dominant.
And they're tied with Arizona for that race for home field advantage. So that's going to come down the wire. Obviously, Arizona's hoping Atlanta takes this one. But before we go, there's another player scoring a lot of touchdowns. But he's on the defensive side of the ball. But he looks pretty comfortable playing on the offensive side of the ball. So I have to ask, does J.J. Watt score again this weekend?
It's still Jacksonville, and I understand a win's a win, but it's against the Giants, and we all know the struggles they've gone through. I feel like that they are absolutely going to go to J.J. Watt. Might even score 2 touchdowns. That's how bad the Jacksonville would be. The Texans are really trying to get a playoff push, and this one, especially if they blow them out, which they definitely will, I feel like, with their great pass defense with Ryan Fitzpatrick as last week, I feel like they're really going to try and get as many touchdowns early as possible. And if they do get a few touchdowns early, why not give it to J.J. Watt a couple of times? I feel like the Texans are really going to – they might rely on him, maybe not too often, but I feel like he'll definitely at least get one score. It's the Jaguars. That's all I have to say.
I mean, J.J. Watt, he said it best. He wants you to sit down, eat some snow cap, and watch him throw more touchdowns. He might just keep going.
We'll never know.
But unfortunately, that will conclude this week's edition of This Week in Football. Tune in on Monday for This Week in Sports. He's Casey Bryant. That's Matt McNamara. I'm Ryan Pavlicek, and we're off.